So, first of all, a little bit about my background. I live in Brazil in the Amazon region. I've been working with indigenous peoples and local communities for many years, mainly on behalf of the protection of traditional knowledge. And I've been writing about the so called green economy projects that are being implemented in the Amazon region. I studied philosophy at the University of Vienna, and right now I am doing my doctoral study at the University of ABC in Sao Paulo. The starting point of my reflections on the so called green economy and the green growth was when, in the early 2000s, and then mainly from 2012 on, the international development policies and the policies for rainforest conservation changed radically. In the 1990s, the policies were based on the idea of sustainable development, and that meant that they dealt actually with things like production, physical production of sustainable products like extraction from latex from rubber trees or gathering Brazil nuts, and this included labor. However, as the climate crisis became more of an issue, the ideas of green economy and natural capital came up, and not only the policies changed, becoming policies basically of financialization of nature, but also the discourse that was used to promote those projects changed radically. It became somehow more out of touch with reality, and it ignores the impact, the severe impacts of these projects in the communities, and it conceals the many times contradictory natures of these projects, and it euphemistically emphasizes ideas of opportunities for everybody and of so-called win-win situations. So this raised for me the question of nature. What are possible meanings of nature? What is the discursive function of nature? What goes on in this discursive shift in terms of nature relation? And actually, anthropologists like Philippe Decola and Eduardo Viveros de Castro, they remind us that this nature-culture dichotomy is something that is unique in our Western mode of thinking. And actually, this specific Occidental nature relation has already been analyzed in the first half of the 20th century by Adorno and Horkheimer in their Dialectics of Enlightenment, where they describe what can be called the paradigm of nature domination, meaning a fundamentally paranoid attitude of man who, out of fear of nature, constantly tries to exert control over it. So Adorno and Horkheimer make use of Freudian psychoanalysis in their work. However, their train of thought can also be translated in the more linguistically oriented Lacanian psychoanalytic theory. And this enables us to describe and differentiate different modes of symbolic and imaginary modes of construction of nature. So, what takes place basically in the realm of the imaginary is the construction of ever new objects of desire. And in the case of nature, this would be the construction of nature as resource, as exploitable and desirable resource. So now, if we translate the paradigm of nature domination as described by Adorno and Horkheimer in Lacanian terms, we will call this the fantasy of nature. The fantasy of nature that sustains the modern Occidental mode of subjectivation. And on the other hand, there is a symbolic construction. And here the signifier nature exerts a limiting and law-giving function. It tells us that we are limited, that our lifetime is limited because we have physical bodies, that we are not immortal, and that our physical environment cannot be exploited endlessly. So this limiting function on a level of individual subjectivation is exerted by what Lacan calls the name of the father. The name of the father is a primordial signifier necessary for the insertion of the subject into the symbolic order. Now, under certain circumstances, in the case of an unsolvable inner conflict, it can happen that this signifier is expelled. And this is a process that is called in psychoanalysis the process of foreclosure. This is when a subject becomes psychotic and when it loses contact with reality and when it starts to hallucinate. So, what I am arguing here is that in the discourse of green economy, and especially in the discourse of green growth, this law giving signifier, nature, is excluded. And the unsolvable conflict, the conflict between endless economic growth and physical limitations, is seemingly suspended in a hallucinated reality. Of course, this does not mean that the persons who reproduce this discourse are psychotic. However, in the discourse, the collapse of the symbolic order of Western civilization is becoming apparent.